All right, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. So, let's go ahead and jump back in to where we left off. Grab a drink, get comfy, and settle in, because we've got a night of something ahead of us. Welcome back. This is our 6th night of reading from Genji Monogatari. Last night was something else. That is certainly one way to put it. So we've seen even more of Genji's fall from our personal graces. I do need to update my drink here. I am taking it easy tonight. It is I don't know, I'm just too lazy to pour. Let's be real. But yes, we have certainly reached new levels of icky squicky. Because, as we've seen, there's been an escalation of Genji's attentions upon Murasaki. Let us not forget, she is a child. Even by these times, they say she is a baby. And those around her are saying, oh, it's time for you to grow up because you're going to be his wife. And on the flip side, Genji was in an awkward, flirtatious engagement with a woman 3-ish times his age. Now, usually I'm not one to stress age too much, but that's pushing it a little. Yeah, I think she's 10 at this time in the story, which is actually irredeemable. Like, there's no defense that can be made. Just no. No. So, with all that, this falls on the backdrop of the seasonal felicitations and festivities, and the Emperor himself praising Genji as a gift from heaven, setting up his rehearsal dance as something to be enshrined in the temples around the capital, so that he can share how lovely his son is with everyone. So, despite everything, Genji's got a little bit of an inflated ego. It's not without cause, but that's not really better, is it? And also, as if that wasn't enough, Genji's fling with his stepmother resulted in him having a child that the Emperor, his father, assumes is his own. Oh. Genji just NTR'd his dad. Cool. Yeah. So, yeah. Classic literature, guys. Classic literature. It's just ahead of the curve indeed. Oh, man. Alright, so, with that little bit of catching up out of the way, let's go ahead and jump back into where we left off last time. And we actually had a nice, round, even end of chapter to leave off on last time. Unusual for this book. We've been really blessed before with how conveniently our chapter timings have lined up with where we will stop for either breaks or the end of the day. Not quite so considerate, this book. Thank you very much, Murasaki Shikibu. I can't really complain too much, but I'll get a vent a little, right? That's fair. Anyway, let's go ahead and jump back in with Chapter 8 of the first volume of The Tale of Genji Monogatari. And this chapter is entitled The Flower Feast. Given the connotations of the previous chapters, and how each chapter, for the most part, is given the name of a flower which corresponds to one of Genji's ladies. This is a rather inauspicious chapter title. We'll see whether or not my misgivings are well-founded. Maybe it's entirely innocent. Or maybe things will continue as they've continued so far, and things will just continue as well. It's just that continuing. Things will inevitably get worse. Because why not? Alright. Chapter 8. The Flower Feast. About the 20th day of the second month, the emperor gave a Chinese banquet under the great cherry tree of the southern court. Both Fujitsubo and the heir apparent were to be there. Kokoden, although she knew that the mere presence of the empress was sufficient to spoil her pleasure, could not bring herself to forego so delightful an entertainment. After some promise of rain, the day turned out magnificent. And in full sunshine, with the birds singing in every tree, the guests, royal princes, noblemen, and professional poets alike, were handed the rhyme words which the emperor had drawn by lot, and set to work to compose their poems. It was with a clear and ringing voice that Genji read out the word spring, which he had received as the rhyme sound of his poem. Next came Tono Chujo, who, feeling that all eyes were upon him and determined to impress himself favorably on his audience, moved with the greatest possible elegance and grace, and when on receiving his rhyme he announced his name, rank, and titles, he took great pains to speak pleasantly as well as audibly. Many of the other gentlemen were rather nervous and looked quite pale as they came forward, yet they acquitted themselves well enough. But the professional poets, particularly owing to the high standard of accomplishment which the emperor's and heir apparent's lively interest in Chinese poetry had at that time diffused through the court, were very ill at ease. As they crossed a long space of the garden on their way to receive their rhymes, they felt utterly helpless. A simple Chinese verse is surely not much to ask of a professional poet, but they all wore an expression of the deepest gloom. One expects elderly scholars to be somewhat odd in their movements and behavior, and it was amusing to see the lively concern with which the emperor watched their various but always uncouth and erratic methods of approaching the throne. Needless to say, a great deal of music had been arranged for. Towards dusk, the delightful dance known as the warbling of spring nightingales was performed. And when it was over, the heir apparent, remembering the festival of red leaves, placed a wreath on Genji's head and pressed him so urgently that it was impossible for him to refuse. Rising to his feet, he danced very quietly a fragment of the sleeve-turning passage in the wave dance. In a few moments he was seated again, but even into this brief extract from a long dance he managed to import an unrivaled charm and grace. Even his father-in-law, who was not in the best of humor with him, was deeply moved and found himself wiping away a tear. Quick reminder that his father-in-law is not very happy with Genji because Genji has basically abandoned his daughter, Genji's wife, to go frolicking with basically anyone with a pulse. Ignoring the fact that about 50% of those that Genji has frolicked with no longer have pulses. So yes, he's ever so slightly justified in his lack of humor. "And why have we not seen Tono Chujo?" said the heir apparent. Whereupon Chujo danced the park of willow flowers, giving a far more complete performance than Genji, for no doubt he knew that he would be called upon, and had taken trouble to prepare his dance. It was a great success, and the emperor presented him with a cloak, which everyone said was a most unusual honor. After this, the other young noblemen who were present danced in no particular order, but it was now so dark that it was impossible to discriminate between their performances. Then the poems were opened and read aloud. The reading of Genji's verses was continually interrupted by loud murmurs of applause. Even the professional poets were deeply impressed, and it may well be imagined what pride the emperor, to whom at times Genji was a source of consolation and delight, watched him upon such an occasion as this. Fujitsubo, when she allowed herself to glance in his direction, marveled that even Kokiden could find it in her heart to hate him. "It is because he is fond of me. There can be no other reason," she decided at last, and the verse, "Were I but a common mortal, who now am gazing at the beauty of this flower, from its sweet petals not long should I withhold the dew of love," framed itself on her lips, though she dared not utter it aloud. It was now very late, and the banquet was over. The guests had scattered, the Empress and the Heir Apparent had both returned to the palace. All was still. The moon had risen very bright and clear. And Genji, heated with wine, could not bear to quit so lovely a scene. The people at the palace were probably all plunged in a heavy sleep. On such a night, it was not impossible that some careless person might have left some door unfastened, some shutter unbarred. Cautiously and stealthily, he crept towards Fujitsubo's apartments and inspected them. Every bolt was fast. He sighed. Here there was evidently nothing to be done. He was passing the loggia of Kokuden's palace when he noticed that the shutters of the third arch were not drawn. After the banquet, Kokuden herself had gone straight to the Emperor's rooms. There did not seem to be anyone about. A door leading from the loggia into the house was standing open, but he could hear no sound within. It is under just such circumstances as this that one is apt to drift into compromising situations, thought Genji. Nevertheless, he climbed quietly onto the balustrade and peeped. Everyone must be asleep, but no! A very agreeable young voice with an intonation which was certainly not that of any waiting woman or common person was softly humming the last two lines of the Oborozukiyo. Was not the voice coming towards him? It seemed so, and stretching out his hand, he suddenly found that he was grasping a lady's sleeve. "Oh, how you frightened me!" she cried. "Who is it? Do not be alarmed," he whispered. "That both of us were not content to miss the beauty of this departing night is proof more clear than the half-clouded moon that we were meant to meet." And as he recited the words, he took her gently by the hand and led her into the house, closing the door behind him. Her surprised and puzzled air fascinated him. "There is someone there," she whispered tremulously, pointing to the inner room. "Child," he answered, "I am allowed to go wherever I please, and if you send for your friends, they will only tell you that I have every right to be here. But if you will stay quietly here..." It was Genji. She knew his voice, and the discovery somewhat reassured her. She thought his conduct rather strange, but she was determined that he should not think her prudish or stiff. And so, because he on his side was still somewhat excited after the doings of the evening, while she was far too young and pliant to offer any serious resistance, he soon got his own way with her. Damn it, Genji. He can't help himself, can he? Oh, there's a window open. Let's see. Oh, yes. Very well and good, Genji. Very well and good. Yeah. That whole, yes, I'm entitled to be here. If you call for help, they'll just laugh at you. Oh, yes, that's a good look. Good on you, Genji. Good on you. Suddenly, they saw to their discomfiture that dawn was creeping into the sky. She looked, thought Genji, as though many disquieting reflections were crowding into her mind. "Tell me your name," he said. "How can I write to you unless you do? Surely this is not going to be our only meeting." She answered with a poem, in which she said that names are of this world only, and he would not care to know hers if he were resolved that their love should last till worlds to come. It was a mere quip, and Genji, amused at her quickness, answered, "You are quite right. It was a mistake on my part to ask." And he recited the poem, "While still I seek to find on which blade dwells the dew, a great wind shakes the grasses of the level land. If you did not repent of this meeting," he continued, "you would surely tell me who you are. I do not believe that you want—" But here he was interrupted by the noise of people stirring in the next room. There was a great bustle, and it was clear that they would soon be starting out to fetch Princess Kokoden back from the palace. There was just time to exchange fans in token of their new friendship. Yeah, friendship, wink wink. Before Genji was forced to fly precipitately from the room. In his own apartments he found many of his gentlemen waiting for him. Some were awake, and these nudged one another when he entered the room as though to say, "Will he never cease these disreputable excursions?" But the discretion forbade them to show that they had seen him, and they all pretended to be fast asleep. Genji too lay down, but he could not rest. He tried to recall the features of the lady with whom he had just spent so agreeable a time. Certainly, she must be one of Kokoden's sisters, perhaps the 5th or 6th daughter, both of whom were still unmarried. The handsomest of them, or so he had always heard, was Prince Sochi's wife, and the 4th daughter, the one with whom Tono Chujo got on so badly. It would really be rather amusing if it did turn out to be Chujo's wife. Oh yes, that's how you muse. It would be so amusing if I just had an affair with my best friend's wife. Genji. The 6th was shortly to be married to the heir apparent. How tiresome if it were he or she! But at present, he could think of no way to make sure. She had not behaved at all as though she did not want to see him again. Why then had she refused to give him any chance of communicating with her? In fact, he worried about the matter so much and turned it over in his mind with such endless persistency that it soon became evident he had fallen deeply in love with her. Nevertheless, no sooner did the recollection of Fujitsubo's serious and reticent demeanor come back to his mind than he realized how incomparably more she meant to him than this light-hearted lady. That day, after the banquet kept him occupied till late at night. At the Emperor's command, he performed on the 13-stringed zithern, and had an even greater success than with his dancing on the day before. At dawn, Fujitsubo retired to the Emperor's rooms. Disappointed in his hope that the lady of last night would be somewhere or somehow make her appearance on the scene, he sent for Yoshikiyo and Korimitsu, with whom all his secrets were shared, and bade them keep watch upon the lady's family. When he returned next day from duty at the palace, they reported that they had just witnessed the departure of several coaches, which had been drawn up under the shelter in the courtyard of the watch. Among a group of persons who seemed to be the domestic attendants of those for whom the coaches were watching, 2 gentlemen came, threading their way in a great hurry. These we recognized as Shi no Shosho and Uchuben, so there is little doubt that the carriages belonged to Princess Kokoden. For the rest, we noted that the ladies were by no means ill-looking, and that the whole party drove away in 3 carriages. Genji's heart beat fast, but he was no nearer than before to finding out which of the sisters it had been. Supposing her father, the Minister of the Right, should hear anything of this, what a to-do there would be! It would indeed mean his absolute ruin. It was a pity that while he was about it, he did not stay with her till it was a little lighter. But there it was. He did not know her face. But yet he was determined to recognize her. How? He lay on his bed, devising and rejecting endless schemes. Murasaki, too, must be growing impatient. Days had passed since he had visited her, and he remembered with tenderness how low-spirited she became when he was not able to be with her. But in a moment, his thoughts had returned to the unknown lady. He still had her fan. It was a folding fan with ribs of hinoki wood, and tassels tied in a splice knot. One side was covered with silver leaf, on which was painted a dim moon, giving the impression of a moon reflected in water. It was a device which he had seen many times before, but it had agreeable associations for him, and continuing the metaphor of the grass on the moor, which she had used in her poem he wrote on the fan, has mortal man ever puzzled his head with such a question before as to ask where the moon goes to when she leaves the sky at dawn? And he put the fan safely away. It was on his conscience that he had not for a long while been to the great hall. But fearing that Murasaki too might be feeling very unhappy, he first went home to give her her lessons. Every day she was improving, not only in looks, but also in amiability of character. The beauty of her disposition was indeed quite out of the common. The idea that so perfect a nature was in his hands, to train and cultivate as he thought best, was very attractive to Genji. It might, however, have been objected that to receive all her education from a young man is likely to make a girl somewhat forward in her manner. First, there was a great deal to tell her about what had happened at the court entertainments of the last few days. Then followed her music lesson, and already it was time to go. "Oh, why must he always go away so soon?" she wondered sadly. But by now she was so used to it that she no longer fretted as she had done a little while ago. At the great hall, he could, as usual, scarcely get a word out of Aoi. The moment that he sat idle, 1,000 doubts and puzzles began to resolve in his mind. He took up his zithern and began to sing. "Not softlier pillowed is my head, that rests by thine unloving bride, than were those jagged stones my bed, through which the falls of Nuki stride." Okay. He's not even trying. He's not even trying to mend things with his wife. If anything, he's just antagonizing her every single time they meet, which is apparently once a month. Genji. At this moment, Aoi's father came by and began to discuss the unusual success of the recent festivities. "Old as I am," he said, "and I may say that I have lived to see 4 illustrious sovereigns occupy the throne, I have never taken part in a banquet which produced verses so spirited or dancing and music so admirably performed. Talent of every description seems at present to exist in abundance, but it is creditable to those in authority that they knew how to make good use of it. For my part, I enjoyed myself so much that had I but been a few years younger, I would positively have joined in the dancing." "No special steps were taken to discover the musicians," answered Genji. "We merely used those who were known to the government in one part of the country, and another as capable performers. If I may say so, it was Chujo's willow dance that made the deepest impression, and is likely always to be remembered as a remarkable performance. But if you, sir, had indeed honored us, a new luster would have been added to my father's reign." Aoi's brothers now arrived, and leaning against the balustrade gave a little concert, their various instruments blending delightfully. Fugitive as their meeting had been, it had sufficed to plunge the lady whose identity Prince Genji was now seeking to establish into the depths of despair. For in the 4th month, she was to become the heir apparent's wife. Turmoil filled her brain. Why had not Genji visited her again? "Lady, you didn't even give her your name. How can you wonder why he's not coming?" He must surely know whose daughter she was. But how should he know which daughter? Besides, her sister Kokoden's house was not a place where, save under very strange circumstances, he was likely to feel at all at his ease. And so she waited, in great impatience and distress. But of Genji there was no news. Alright, so we know, Genji does not know, but we know now that he did in fact sleep with his older brother's fiancée. Cool. Cool! Genji, come on, man. About the 20th day of the 3rd month, her father, the Minister of the Right, held an archery meeting, at which most of the young noblemen and princes were present. It was followed by a wistaria feast. The cherry blossom was, for the most part, over. But 2 trees, which the minister seemed somehow to have persuaded to flower later than all the rest, were still an enchanting sight. He had had his house rebuilt only a short time ago, when celebrating the initiation of his granddaughters, the children of Kokoden. It was now a magnificent building, and not a thing in it but was of the very latest fashion. He had invited Genji when he had met him in the palace, only a few days before, and was extremely annoyed when he did not appear. Feeling that the party would be a failure if Genji did not come, he sent his son, Shi no Shosho, to fetch him, with the poem, "Were my flowers as those of other gardens, never should I have ventured to summon you." Genji was in attendance upon the Emperor, and at once showed him the message. "He seems very pleased with himself and his flowers," said his Majesty with a smile, adding, "As he has sent for you like this, I think you had better go. After all, your half-sisters are being brought up at his house, and you ought not to treat him quite as a stranger." He went to his apartments and dressed. It was very late indeed when at last he made his appearance at the party. He was dressed in a cloak of thin Chinese fabric, white outside but lined with yellow. His robe was of a deep wine-red color, with a very long train. The dignity and grace with which he carried this fancifully regal attire, in a company where all were dressed in plain official robes, were indeed remarkable. And in the end, his presence perhaps contributed more to the success of the party than did the fragrance of the minister's boasted flowers. His entry was followed by some very agreeable music. It was already fairly late when Genji, on the plea that the wine had given him a headache, left his seat and went for a walk. He knew that his 2 stepsisters, the daughters of Kokoden, were in the inner apartments of the palace. He went to the eastern portico and rested there. It was on this side of the house that the wistaria grew. The wooden blinds were raised, and a number of ladies were leaning out of the window to enjoy the blossoms. They had hung bright-colored robes and shawls over the windowsill, just as is done at the time of the New Year dancing, and other gala days that were behaving with a freedom of allure which contrasted very oddly with the somber decorum of Fujitsubo's household. "I am feeling rather overpowered by all the noise and bustle of the flower party," Genji explained. "I am very sorry to disturb my sisters, but I can think of nowhere else to seek refuge." And advancing towards the main door of the women's apartments, he pushed back the curtain with his shoulder. "Refuge indeed!" cried one of the ladies, laughing at him. "You ought to know by now that it is only poor relations who come to seek refuge with the more successful members of their family. What, pray, have you come to bother us for? Impertinent creatures!" he thought, but nevertheless there was something in their manner which convinced him that they were persons of some consequence in the house, and not, as he at first supposed, were mere waiting women. A scent of costly perfumes pervaded the room. Silken shirts rustled in the darkness. There could be little doubt that these were Kokoden's sisters and their friends. Deeply absorbed, as indeed was the whole of this family, in the fashionable gaieties of the moment, they had flouted decorum and posted themselves at the window, that they might see what little they could of the banquet, which was proceeding outside. Little thinking that his plan could succeed, yet led on by delightful recollections of his previous encounter, he advanced towards them, chanting in a careless undertone the song, "At Ishikawa, Ishikawa, a man from Koma took my belt away." but for belt, he substituted fan, and by this means he sought to discover which of the ladies was his friend. "Why, you've got it wrong! I have never heard of that Korean one of them cried. Certainly it was not she, but there was another who, though she remained silent, seemed to him to be sighing softly to herself. He stole towards the curtain of slate behind which she was sitting, and, taking her hand in his at a venture, he whispered the poem, "If on this day of shooting my arrow went astray, 'twas that in dim morning twilight only the mark had glimmered in my view." And she, unable any longer to hide that she knew him, answered with the verse, "Had it been with the arrows of the heart that you had shot, though from the moon's slim bow no brightness came, would you have missed your mark?" Yes, it was her voice. He was delighted. And yet... Alright, that brings us to the end of chapter 8. So, Genji has gotten up to his escapades in a very short chapter, mind you. Already he has found a way to have relations with his half-brothers promised. And at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if he manages to just run the table on the family tree. Like, he's making an honest effort of it so far. I think if at this point it would be irresponsible not to have Kokiden herself on the bingo card. I mean, it's going to happen. We have to know it's going to happen. She hated his mother. She hates him. They're gonna sleep together. It's gonna happen. Yeah, Genji and the Targaryens both, you know? Alright, so this next chapter is actually quite a doozy. So this is probably going to be as far as we get tonight. We'll read this, have a break in a little bit, and then keep going. It will probably, we might finish. 22 pages for one chapter is kind of wild, honestly. Oh, okay, this is actually the last chapter. No wonder it's so long. So, this will keep us busy. And actually, we might finish tomorrow then, because there are 2 appendices. Let me see, actually. The first appendix is only a page, so never mind. The next one's only 2 pages. But they're transcriber notes for another little bit. Yeah, that makes sense. But yeah, 22 pages for this next one. Gosh. Alright, so, with the foreknowledge that this is the last chapter of this first volume of Genji Monogatari, let's be aptly prepared. We'll take a moment, let it sink in. We're almost through. And there's only so much time yet for Genji to get up to trouble. But I have faith. He's going to find a way to crush any remaining hopes we have that he's able to be redeemed. He can do it. There's only so many ways that things can go wrong, and he's marking off his bucket list. That is for sure. For sure. All right. So, let's go ahead and dive into the last chapter of the book and of the evening. Chapter 9. Aoi. Oh, okay. So, this one's actually titled after his wife. I wonder whether they'll actually reconcile. At this point, this is almost surprising. I was wondering whether he'd actually cultivate any relationship with his wife as this was all going on. So far, it seemed unlikely. But stranger things have happened. And I guess if they are married, she is still in the family, right? Alright, Chapter 9. The accession of the new emperor was, in many ways, unfavorable to Genji's position. His recent promotion, too, brought with it heavy responsibilities, which, sadly, interrupted the course of his hidden friendships. So that complaints of desertion or neglect were soon heaped upon him from more than one quarter, while, as though fate wished to turn the tables upon him, the one being on earth, for whose love he longed in vain, had now utterly abandoned him. Now that the emperor was free to live as he chose, she was more constantly than ever at his side. Nor was her peace any longer disturbed by the presence of a rival, for Kokiden, resenting the old emperor's neglect, now seldom left her son's palace. A constant succession of banquets and entertainments, the magnificence of which became the talk of the whole country, helped to enliven the ex-emperor's retirement, and he was, on the whole, very well content with his new condition. His only regret concerned the heir apparent, whose position, unsupported by any powerful influence outside the palace, he regarded as extremely insecure. He constantly discussed the matter with Genji, begging him to enlist the support of the Minamoto clan. Such conversations tended to be somewhat embarrassing, but they gave Genji pleasure in so far as they enabled him to take measures for the boy's welfare. An unexpected event now occurred. Lady Rokujo's daughter, by her late husband Prince Zembo, was chosen to be the new Vestal Virgin at Ise. Her mother, who at the time when the appointment was first announced happened to be particularly aggrieved at Genji's treatment of her, at once determined to make her daughter's extreme youth a pretext for leaving the capital and settling permanently at Ise. Being, at the moment, as I have said, very much out of humor, she discussed the matter openly, making no secret of her real reasons for wishing to leave the city. The story soon reached the ex-emperor's ears, and sending for Genji, he said to him, "The late prince, my brother, was, as you probably know, regarded with the utmost affection and esteem, and I am profoundly grieved to hear that your reckless and inconsiderate conduct has cast a slur upon his family. For his daughter, indeed, I feel as much responsible as if she were of my own children. I must trouble you in future to safeguard to the utmost of your power the reputation of these unfortunate ladies. If you do not learn to keep better control over your frivolous inclinations, you will soon find yourself becoming extremely unpopular." Why should his father be so much upset over the matter? And Genji, smarting under the rebuke, was about to defend himself, when it occurred to him that the warning was not at all ill-merited, and he maintained a respectful silence. Okay, Genji is actually getting scolded, taken to task? What? Okay. There are some characters of relatively reasonable inclination in this book. Mind you, it's probably about 15 years overdue, but it is what it is. That's all right. Affairs of this kind, the ex-emperor continued. Oh, he's continuing. He'll find a way to bungle this yet. Must be managed so that the woman, no matter who she is, need not feel that she has been brought into a humiliating position, or treated in a cynical and offhand way. Forget this rule, and she will soon make you feel the unpleasant consequences of her resentment. Wicked as he thinks me already, said Genji to himself, while this lecture was going on, there is much worse enormity of which he as yet knows nothing. And stupefied with horror at the thought of what would ensue should his father ever discover this hideous secret, he bowed and left the room. Okay, so he did manage to ruin it just a little. This was less a dressing down and more a, okay, if you're going to have affairs, at least do it smartly sort of talk. Not terribly surprising. I'm sure the retired emperor has had plenty of his own. But, I mean, that's part of the position. Right? Yeah. What the ex-emperor had said about ruining other people's reputations cut him to the quick. He realized that Rokujo's rank and widowed position entitled her to the utmost consideration. But, after all, it was not he who had made public property of the affair. On the contrary, he had done everything in his power to prevent its becoming known. There had always been a certain condescension in her treatment of him, arising perhaps from the inequality of their ages. And this estrangement from her was solely due to the coldness with which she had for a long time received him. That their private affairs were now known, not only to the ex-emperor, but also presumably to the whole court, showed a lack of reticence which seemed to him deplorable. Among others who had heard of the business was Princess Asagao. Determined that she, at least, would not submit herself to such treatment, she ceased to answer his letters, even with the short and guarded replies that she had been in the habit of sending him. Nevertheless, he found it hard to believe that so gentle-mannered a creature was thinking unkindly of him, and continued to regard her with devoted admiration. Princess Aoi, when the story reached her ears, was, of course, distressed by this new instance of his fickleness. But she felt that it was useless. Now that his infidelity was open and unabashed, to protest against one particular injury, and to his surprise, she seemed to take the matter rather lightly. She was suffering much inconvenience from her condition, and her spirits were very low. Her parents were delighted, and at the same time surprised to hear of what was to come, but their pleasure, and that of all her friends, was marred by grave forebodings, and it was arranged that prayers for her health and special services of intercession should be recited in all the temples. At such a time it was impossible for Genji to leave her, and there were many who, though his feelings had not in reality cooled towards them, felt that they were being neglected. The Vestal Virgin of Kamo still remained to be selected. The choice fell upon Kokuden's daughter, San no Miya. She was a great favorite, both with her brother, the new emperor, and with the empress mother. Her retirement from the world was a bitter blow to them, but there was no help for it, since she alone of all the royal princesses fulfilled the prescribed conditions. The actual ritual of investiture could not be altered, but the emperor saw to it that the proceedings should be attended with the utmost pomp and splendor, while to the customary ritual of the Kamo festival he added so many touches that it became a spectacle of unparalleled magnificence. All this was due to his partiality for the virgin-elect. On the day of her purification, the Virgin is attended by a mixed number of noblemen and princes. For this retinue, the emperor was at pains to choose the best-built and handsomest of the young men at court. He settled what colored gowns they were to wear, what pattern was to be on their breeches, and even on what saddles they should ride. By a special decree, he ordered that Prince Genji should join this retinue, and so great was everyone's desire to get a good view of the procession that long beforehand people were getting ready special carriages with which to line the route. The scene along the high road of the First Ward was one of indescribable excitement. Dense crowds surged along the narrow space allotted to them, while the stands which with a wealth of ingenious fancy had been constructed all along the route of the procession, with gay cloaks and shawls hung over the balustrades, were in themselves a spectacle of astonishing beauty. Okay, so let's parse this for a minute. So they're sending a ritual virgin off to be enshrined to take her place, and they're sending her with noblemen and princes, and chosen to be with the princes is Genji, who very recently we've seen has a reputation around the court for his infidelity and indiscretions. So it's not like it's a secret. It's not even an open secret. It's just out there What could possibly go wrong? Yeah, exactly. Like, the least trustworthy man that you could find. It had never been Aoi's practice to be present at such occasions as this, and in her present state of health, she would not have dreamt of doing so, had not her gentlewomen pressed round her, saying, "Come, madame, it will be no fun for us to go by ourselves and be hidden away in some corner. It is to see Prince Genji that all these people have come today. Why, all sorts of queer wild men from the mountains are here." Uh-huh. "And people have brought their wives and children from provinces ever so far away. If all these people who are nothing to do with him have taken the trouble to come so far, it will be too bad if you, his own lady, are not there." Overhearing this, Aoi's mother joined in. "You are feeling much better just now," she said. "I think you ought to make the effort. It will be so disappointing for your gentlewomen." At the last minute, Aoi changed her mind, and announced that she was going. It was now so late that there was no time to put on gala clothes. The whole of the enclosure allotted for this purpose was already lined with coaches, which were packed so close that it was quite impossible to find space for the large and numerous carriages of Aoi and her train. A number of grand ladies began to make room for her, backing their coaches away from a suitable space in the reserved enclosure. Conspicuous among the rest were 2 basket-work carriages, of a rather old-fashioned pattern, but with curtains such as are used by persons of quality. Very discreetly, decked with draperies that barely showed beneath the curtains. Yet these draperies, whether sleeve, favor, or skirt, or scarf, all of the handsomest colors. They seemed to belong to some exalted personage who did not wish to be recognized. When it was their turn to move, the coachman in charge of them would not lift a finger. "It is not for such as we to make way," they said stiffly, and did not stir. Among the attendants on both sides, there was a number of young grooms who were already the worse for liquor. They were longing for a scuffle, and it was impossible to keep them in hand. The staid and elderly outriders tried to call them back, but they took no notice. As will young grooms the world over. Give them a chance. They will get in trouble with the liquor. The 2 carriages belonged to Princess Rokujo, who had come secretly to the festival, hoping for a while to find distraction from her troubles. Despite the steps which she had taken to conceal her identity, it was at once suspected by some of Aoi's gentlemen, and they cried to the grooms that this was not an equipage which could be dealt with so high-handedly. Or it would be said that their lady was abusing her position as wife of the Lord Commander. But at this moment, a number of Genji's servants mingled into the fray. They knew Rokujo's men by sight, but after a moment's embarrassment, they decided not to give assistance to the enemy by betraying his identity. Thus reinforced, Aoi's side won the day, and at length her coach and those of all her ladies were drawn up along the front row, while Rokujo's was pushed back among a miscellaneous collection of carts and jigs, where she could see nothing at all. She was vexed beyond measure, not only at missing what she had come to see, but also that despite all her precautions, she had been recognized, and, as she was convinced, deliberately insulted. Her shaft rest and other parts of her coach as well were damaged, and she was obliged to prop it up against some common person's carriage wheels. Why, she vainly asked herself, had she come among these hateful crowds? She would go home at once. What sense was there in waiting for the procession to come? But when she tried to go, she found that it was impossible to force a way through the dense crowds. She was still struggling to escape when the cry went up that the procession was in sight. Her resolution weakened. She would wait till Genji had passed by. He did not see her. Could he? For the crowds flashed by him like the hurrying images that a stream catches and breaks. She realized this, yet her disappointment was none the less. The carriages that lined the route, decked and garlanded for this great day, were crammed to overflowing with excited ladies who, though there was no room for them, would not consent to be left behind. Peeping out under the blinds of their coaches, they smiled at the great personages, who were passing quite regardless of whether their greetings were acknowledged. But every now and then a smile would be rewarded by a quick glance, or the backward turn of a head. Aoi's party was large and conspicuous. He wheeled round as he passed, and saluted its members attentively. Rider after rider again, as the procession went by, would pause in front of Aoi's coach and salute her with the deepest respect. The humiliation of witnessing all this from an obscure corner was more than Rokujo could bear, and murmuring the lines, "Though I saw him but as a shadow that falls on hurrying waters, yet knew I that at last my hour of utmost misery was come," she burst into tears. It was hideous that her servants should see her in this state, yet even while she struggled with her tears, she could not find it in her heart to regret that she had seen him in all his glory. The riders in the procession were indeed all magnificently apparelled, each according to his own rank. In particular, the young nobleman chosen by the emperor cut so brilliant a figure that only the luster of Genji's beauty could have eclipsed their splendor. The commander of this bodyguard is not generally allotted a palace officer as his special attendant, but, as the occasion was of such importance to the imperial treasurer, rode at Genji's side. It seemed to those who saw so many public honors showered upon him that no flower of fortune could resist the favoring gale which blew towards his side. There were among the crowd women of quite good birth, who had dressed in walking skirts and come a long way on foot. There were nuns and other female recluses who, though in order to see anything of the procession they were obliged to endure being constantly pushed off their feet, and though they commonly regarded all such spectacles with contempt and aversion, were today declaring that they would not have missed it for anything. There were old men grinning through toothless gums, strange-looking girls with their hair poked away under ragged hoods, and stolid peasant boys standing with hands raised as though in prayer, whose uncouth faces were suddenly transfigured with wonder and joy as the procession burst into sight. Even the daughters of remote provincial magistrates and governors, who had no acquaintances whatever in the city, had expended as much coquetry upon the decoration of their persons and coaches as if they were about to submit themselves to a lover's inspection, and their equipages made a bright and varied show. Even these strangers were in such a taking, it may be imagined that, with what excitement scattered here and there among the crowd, those with whom Genji was in secret communication watched the procession go by, and with how many hidden sighs their bosoms heaved. Prince Momozono had a seat in one of the stands. He was amazed to see his nephew grown up into such a prodigiously handsome young man, and was alarmed lest soon the gods should cast an envious eye upon him. Princess Asagao could not but be touched by the rare persistency with which, year after year, Genji had pressed his suit. Even had he been positively ugly, she would have found it hard to resist some importunity. So small wonder if, seeing him ride by in all his splendor, she marveled that she had held out so long. But she was determined to know him much better before she committed herself. The young waiting women who were with her were careful to belaud him in extravagant terms. To the festival itself, Aoi did not go. The affray between her servants and those of Rokujo was soon reported to Genji. It vexed him beyond measure that such a thing should have occurred. That the exquisitely well-bred Aoi should have been in any way responsible for this outburst of insolent ruffianism, he did not for a moment believe. It must be the work of rough underservants who, though they had no actual instructions, had imbibed the notion that all was not well between the two houses, and imagined that they would get credit for espousing their mistress's cause. He knew well enough that the unusual vanity and susceptibility of the affronted lady. Distressed to think of the pain which this incident must have caused her, he hastened to her house. But her daughter, the virgin-elect of Ise, was still in the house. She made this a plea for turning him away, after the exchange of a few formal words. He had the greatest possible sympathy for her, but he was feeling rather tired of coping with injured sensibilities. He could not face the idea of going straight back to the Great Hall. It was the day of the Kamo Festival, and going to his own palace, he ordered Koremitsu to get his coach ready. "Look at her!" he cried, smiling fondly at Murasaki, when she appeared in all her finery, surrounded by the little children whom he had given her for playmates. She must needs bring her dames to wait upon her. And stroking her lovely hair, which today Shonagon had dressed with more than usual care. "It is getting rather long," he said. "Today would not be a bad time to have it cut." And sending for his astrologer, he bade him consult his books. "The maids of honor first!" he cried, nodding at the pretty troop of babes. And their dainty tresses were trimmed so as to hang neatly over their diapered holiday gowns. "I am going to cut yours myself," he said to Murasaki. "What a lot of it there is! I wonder how much longer it would have grown." Really, it was quite hard work. "People with very long hair ought to wear it cut rather short over the temples," he said at last. "But I have not the heart to crop you any closer." And he laid the knife down. Shonagon's gratification knew no bounds when she heard him reciting the prayer with which the ceremony of hair-cutting should conclude. There is a seaweed called miru, which is used in the dressing of ladies' hair, and, playing upon this word, which also means to see, he recited a poem in which he said that the miru weed, which had been used in the washing of her hair, was a token that he would forever fondly watch it grow. She answered that, like the sea tides, which visit the miru in its cleft, he came but went away, and often her tresses, unwatched by him, would, like the hidden seaweed, grow. This she wrote very prettily on a slip of paper, and though the verse had no merit in it, but the charm of a childish mind, it gave him great delight. Today, the crowds were as thick as ever. With great difficulty, he managed to wedge in his carriage close to the royal stables. But here they were surrounded by somewhat turbulent young noblemen, and he was looking for a quieter place when a smart carriage crammed full of ladies drew up nearby, and someone in it beckoned with a fan to Genji's servants. "Will you not come over where we are?" said one of the ladies. "We will gladly make room for you." Such an offer was, perhaps, somewhat forward. But the place she had indicated was such a good one that Genji at once accepted the invitation. "I am afraid it is very unfair that we should take your place like this," Genji was beginning to say politely, when one of the ladies handed him a fan, with the corner bent down. Here he found the poem, "This flower-decked day of meeting, when the great God unfolds his portents in vain, have I waited, for alas, another is at thy side." Surely the handwriting was familiar. Yes, it was that of the ancient lady of the bedchamber. Oh no. He felt that it was time she should give up such pranks as this, and answered discouragingly, "Not ours this day of tryst, when garlanded and passionate the 80 tribes converge." This put the lady out of countenance, and she replied, "Now bitterly do I repent, that for this cheating day my head is decked with flowers, for in name only is it a day of meeting." Their carriages remained side by side, but Genji did not even draw up the side curtains, which was a disappointment to more persons than one. The magnificence of his public appearance a few days ago was contrasted by everyone with the unobtrusive manner in which he now mingled with the crowd. It was agreed that his companion, whoever she might be, must certainly be some very great lady. Genji was afraid that his neighbor was going to prove troublesome. but fortunately some of her companions had more discretion than their mistress, and out of consideration for the unknown sharer of Genji's coach, persuaded the voluble lady to restrain herself. Alright, that is a decent place for us to stop because we are shifting a little bit of perspective here next. So, we'll be back in just a few minutes. Let's stretch our legs, top up our drinks, and be back in just a little bit. Need to get a little bit of a palate cleanser because, I don't know about you, but an old lady flirting with Genji was a little bit much for me. So, we'll be back in just a little while. Alright, we are back. I might be a little bit impressionable, so just a moment, I need to update something. It doesn't take a whole lot to convince me to partake. A fault? Nah. This is a virtue. Alright, so we've got some activity here on this front. Some budding jealousy between Rokujo, one of Genji's first flings, and Aoi, his wife, who is generally estranged, but not entirely. And Genji's trying to patch things up, but generally not very well. He's not really all that good at interpersonal relations that are of the vertical variety. It's a wonder. Alright, so let's see how this can possibly get worse, because, well, I mean, let's be honest, it's going to get worse. It's just a matter of the how. Lady Rokujo's sufferings were now far worse than in previous years. Though she could no longer endure to be treated as Genji was treating her, yet the thought of separating from him altogether and going so far away agitated her so much that she constantly deferred her journey. She felt, too, that she would become a laughingstock if it was thought that she had been spurned to flight by Genji's scorn. Yet, if at the last moment she changed her plans and stayed behind, everyone would think her conduct extremely ill-balanced and unaccountable. Thus, her days and nights were spent in an agony of indecision, and often she repeated to herself the lines, "My heart, like the fishers float on Ise shore, is danced from wave to wave." She felt herself indeed swirled this way and that by paroxysms that sickened her, but were utterly beyond her control. Genji, though it pained him that she should feel it necessary to go so far away, did not attempt to dissuade her from the journey. "It is quite natural," he wrote, "that tiresome creatures as I am, you should want to put me altogether out of your head. I only beg that, even though you see no use in it, you will let me see you once more before you go. Were we to meet, you would soon realize that I care for your happiness far more than you suppose." But she could not forget how, when at the river of cleansing, she sought a respite from the torture of her own doubt and indecision, rough waves had dashed her against the rocks, and she brooded more and more upon this wrong, till there was room for no other thought in all her heart. I know he's just saying pretty words, but for Genji to actually realize that he's something of a tiresome creature, that's some self-awareness we're not used to seeing. That's the sort of self-awareness that Henry in Red Badge of Courage had at the first chapter, and we saw how well that went for him. So, let's not take this as a good sign, because when is it ever a good sign that there's some self-awareness in a character? That only means that they can go digging deeper. Meanwhile, Princess Aoi became strangely distraught, and it seemed at times as though some hostile spirit had entered into her. The whole household was plunged into such a state of anxiety and gloom that Genji had not the heart to absent himself for more than a few hours. It was only very occasionally that he got even as far as his own palace. After all, she was his wife. Moreover, despite all the difficulties that had arisen between them, he cared for her very much indeed. Oh yeah, sure. He could no longer disguise from himself that there was something wrong with her in addition to the discomfort which naturally accompanied her condition. And he was in a state of great distress. Constant rituals of exorcism and divination were performed under his discretion. It was generally agreed that all the signs indicated possession by the spirit of some living person. How the hell does that work? Many names were tried, but to none of them did the spirit respond, and it seemed as though it would be impossible to shift it. Aoi herself felt that some alien thing had entered into her, and though she was not conscious of any one definite pain or dread, the sense that the thing was there never for a moment left her. The greatest healers of the day were powerless to eject it, and it became apparent that this was no ordinary case of possession. Some tremendous accumulation of malice was discharging itself upon her. It was natural that her friends should turn over in their minds the names of those whom Genji had most favored. It was whispered that only with Lady Rokujo and the girl at the Nijo-in was he on terms of such intimacy that their jealousy would be at all likely to produce a fatal effect. But when the doctors attempted to conjure the spirit by the use of these names, there was no visible response. This is some pretty high-level quackery going on. She had not, in all the world, any enemy who might be practicing conscious witchcraft against her. Such indispositions were sometimes attributed to possession by the spirit of some dead retainer or old family nurse, or again, the malice of someone whom the minister, Aoi's father, had offended might, owing to her delicate condition, have fastened upon her instead of him. Conjecture after conjecture was accepted, and then falsified. Meanwhile, she lay perpetually weeping. Constantly, indeed, she would break out into fits of sobbing so violent that her breath was stopped, while those about her, in great alarm for her safety, stood by in misery, not knowing what to do. The ex-emperor inquired after her continually. He even ordered special services to be set on her behalf, and these attentions served to remind her parents in what high estimation she was held at the court. Not among her friends only, but throughout the whole country, the news of her illness caused great distress. Rokujo heard of her sufferings with deep concern. For years, they had been in open rivalry for Genji's favors. But even after that wretched affair of the coaches, though it must be admitted that this had greatly incensed her, she had never gone so far as to wish evil against the princess. She herself was very unwell. Everyone who crosses Genji's path is unwell. She began to feel that the violent and distracting emotions which continually assailed her had, in some subtle way, unhinged her mind, and she determined to seek spiritual assistance at a place some miles distant from her home. Genji heard of this, and in great anxiety concerning her at once set out for the house where she was reported to be staying. It lay beyond the city precincts, and he was obliged to go with the greatest secrecy. He begged her to forgive him for not having come to see her for so long. "I have not been having a very cheerful time," he said, and gave her some account of Aoi's condition. He wanted to make her feel that if he had stayed away, it had been from a melancholy necessity, and not because he had found more amusing company elsewhere. It is... It is not so much my own anxiety that unnerves me as the spectacle of the appalling helplessness and misery into which her illness has plunged her wretched parents, and it was in the hope of forgetting for a little while all these sick-room horrors that I came to see you here today. If only just for this once, you could overlook all my offenses and be kind to me. Oh, Genji, come on. Brother. You do not get to play the sympathy card. His pleading had no effect. You go, girl. Her attitude was more hostile than ever. He was not angry with her, nor indeed was he surprised. Day was already breaking when, unsolaced, he set out for home. But as she watched him go, his beauty suddenly made havoc of all her resolutions, and again she felt that it was madness to leave him. Yet what had she to stay for? Aoi was with child. Oh, that's news. And this could only be a sign that he had made his peace with her. Henceforward, he could lead a life of irreproachable rectitude, and if once in a way he came to make his excuse as he had come today, what purpose would that serve, save to keep ever fresh the torment of her desires? Thus, when his letter came next day, it found her more distraught than ever. The sick woman, who for a few days past had shown some improvement, is again suffering acutely, and it is at present impossible for me to leave her. Certain that this was a mere excuse, she sent in reply the poem, "The fault is mine, and the regret, if careless as the peasant girl who stoops too low amid the spouting rice, I soiled my sleeve in love's dark road." At the end of her letter, she reminded him of the old song, "Now bitterly do I repent that ever I brought my pitcher to the mountain where waters were but deep enough to soil my sleeve." He looked at the delicate handwriting. Who was there, even among women of her high lineage and breeding, that could rival the ineffable grace and elegance with which this small note was penned? That one whose mind and person alike so strongly attracted him must now, by his own act, be lost to him forever was a bitter thought. Though it was almost dark, he sat down and wrote to her, "Do not say that the waters have but wetted your sleeve. The shallowness is in your comparison only, not in my affections." And to this he added the poem, "'Tis you only, who have loitered among the shallow pools, while I, till all my limbs were drenched, have battled through the thickets of love's dark track." And he ended with the words, "Had but a ray of comfort lighted the troubles of this house, I should myself have been the bearer of this note." Meanwhile, Aoi's possession had returned in full force. She was in a state of pitiable torment. It reached Lady Rokujo's ears that the illness had been attributed by some to the operation of her living spirit. Others, she was told, believed that her father's ghost was avenging the betrayal of his daughter. She brooded constantly upon the nature of her own feelings towards Aoi, but could discover in herself nothing but intense unhappiness. Of hostility towards Aoi, she could find no trace at all. Yet, she could not be sure whether somewhere, in the depths of a soul consumed by anguish, some spark of malice had not lurked. Through all the long years during which she had loved and suffered, though it had often seemed to her that greater torment could not anywhere in the world exist, her whole being had never once been so utterly bruised and shattered as in these last days. It had begun with that hateful episode of the coaches. She had been scorned, treated as though she had no right to exist. Yes, it was true that since the Festival of Purification, her mind had been buffeted by such a tempest of conflicting resolutions that sometimes it seemed as though she had lost all control over her own thoughts. She remembered how one night she had suddenly, in the midst of agonizing doubts and indecisions, found that she had been dreaming. It seemed to her that she had been in a large, magnificent room, where lay a girl whom she knew to be the Princess Aoi. Snatching her by the arm, she had dragged and mauled the prostrate figure, with an outburst of brutal fury such as in her waking life would have been utterly foreign to her. Since then, she had had the same dream several times. How terrible! It seemed then that it was really possible for one's spirit to leave the body and break out into emotions which the waking mind would not countenance. Even where someone's actions are all but irreproachable, she reflected, people take a malicious delight in saying nothing about the good he has done and everything about the evil. With what joy would they seize upon such a story as this? That after his death, a man's ghost should pursue his enemies is a thing which seems to be of constant occurrence. Yet, even this is taken as a sign that the dead man was of a fiendishly venomous and malignant character, and his reputation is utterly destroyed. What then will become of me, if it is thought that while still alive, I have been guilty of so hideous a crime. She must face her fate. She had lost Genji forever. If she were to keep any control at all over her own thoughts, she must, first of all, find some way of putting him wholly out of mind. She kept on reminding herself not to think of him, so that this very resolve led her, in the end, to think of him but the more. The Virgin of Ise should, by rights, have entered upon her duties before the end of the year, but difficulties of various kinds arose, and it was not until the autumn of the next year that she could at last be received. She was to enter the palace in the fields in the 9th month, but this was decided so late that the arrangements of her second purification had to be made in great haste. It was very inconvenient that at this crisis her mother, so far from superintending the preparations, spent hour after hour after hour dazed and helpless upon her bed. At last, the priests arrived to fetch the girl away. They took a grave view of the mother's condition and gave her the benefit of their presence by offering up many prayers and incantations. But week after week, she remained in the same condition, showing no symptom which seemed actually dangerous, yet all the time, in some vague and indefinite way, obviously very ill. Genji sent constantly to inquire after her, but she saw clearly that his attention was occupied by quite other matters. Aoi's delivery was not yet due, and no preparations for it had been made, when suddenly there were signs that it was close at hand. She was in great distress, but though the healers recited prayer upon prayer, their utmost efforts could not shift by one jot the spiteful power which had possessed her. All the greatest miracle workers of the land were there. The utter failure of their ministrations irritated and perplexed them. At last, daunted by the potency of their incantations, the spirit that possessed her found voice, and weeping bitterly, she was heard to say, "Give me a little respite. There is a matter of which Prince Genji and I must speak." The healers nodded at one another, as though to say, "Now we shall learn something worth knowing." For they were convinced that the possession was speaking through the mouth of the possessed, and they hurried Genji to her bedside. Her parents, thinking that her end being near, she desired to give some last secret injunction to Genji, retired to the back of the room. The priests, too, ceased their incantations, and began to recite the Hokkekyo in low, impressive tones. He raised the bed curtain. She looked lovely as ever as she lay there, very big with child, and any man who saw her, even now, would have found himself strangely troubled by her beauty. How much the more than Prince Genji, whose heart was already overflowing with tenderness and remorse. The plaited tresses of her long hair stood out in sharp contrast to her white jacket. Even to this loose sick-room garb, her natural grace imparted the air of a fashionable gown. He took her hand. "It is terrible," he began, "to see you looking so unhappy." He could say no more. Still she gazed at him, but through his tears he saw that there was no longer in her eyes the wounded scorn that he had come to know so well, but a look of forbearance and tender concern. And while she watched him weep, her own eyes brimmed with tears. It would not do for him to go on crying like this. Her father and mother would be alarmed. Besides, it was upsetting Aoi herself, and meaning to cheer her, he said, "Come, things are not so bad as that. You will soon be much better, but even if anything should happen, it is certain that we shall meet again in worlds to come. Your father and mother too, and many others, love you so dearly, that between your fate and theirs must be some sure bond that will bring you back to them in many, many lives that are to be." Suddenly she interrupted him. No, it is not it. But stop these prayers a while. They do me great harm." And drawing him nearer to her, she went on, "I did not think that you would come. I have waited for you till all my soul is burnt with longing." She spoke wistfully, tenderly, and still in the same tone recited the verse, "Bind thou, as the seam of a skirt is braided, this shred, that from my soul despair and loneliness have sundered." The voice in which these words were said was not Aoi's, nor was the manner hers. He knew someone whose voice was very like that. Who was it? Why, yes, surely only she, the Lady Rokujo. Once or twice, he had heard people suggest that something of this kind might be happening. He had always rejected the idea as hideous and unthinkable, believing it to be the malicious invention of some unprincipled scandalmonger, and had even denied that such possession ever took place. Now, he had seen one with his own eyes. Ghastly, unbelievable as they were, such things did happen in real life. Controlling himself, at last, he said in a low voice, "I am not sure who is speaking to me. Do not leave me in doubt." Her answer proved only too conclusively that he had guessed aright. To his horror, her parents now came back to the bed, but she had ceased to speak. And seeing her now lying quietly, her mother thought the attack was over, and was coming towards the bed, carrying a basin of hot water, when Aoi suddenly started up and bore a child. Oh, okay. For the moment, all was gladness and rejoicing, but it seemed only too likely that the spirit which possessed her had but been temporarily dislodged, for a fierce fit of terror was soon upon her, as though the thing, whatever it was, were angry at having been put to the trouble of shifting, so that there was still grave anxiety about the future. The abbot of Tendai and the other great ecclesiastics, who were gathered together in the room, attributed her easy delivery to the persistency of their own incantations and prayers, and they hastily withdrew to seek refreshment and repose. They wiped the sweat from their brows with an expression of considerable self-satisfaction. Oh yes, it's all the prayers. They did it. Absolutely. Good job, guys. Good on you. Her friends, who had for days been plunged in the deepest gloom, now began to take heart a little, believing that although there was no apparent improvement yet, now that the child was safely born, she could not fail to mend. The prayers and incantations began once more, but throughout the house there was a new feeling of confidence, for the amusement of looking after the baby at least gave them some relief from the strain under which they had been living for so many days. Handsome presents were sent by the ex-emperor, the royal princes of all the court, forming an array which grew more dazzling each night. The fact that the child was a boy made the celebrations connected with this birth all the more sumptuous and elaborate. Oh yeah, of course. The news of this event took Lady Rokujo somewhat aback. The last report she had heard from the Great Hall was that the confinement was bound to be very dangerous. And now they said that there had not been the slightest difficulty. She thought this very peculiar. She had herself for a long while been suffering from the most disconcerting sensations. Often she felt as though her whole personality had in some way suddenly altered. It was as though she were a stranger to herself. Recently, she had noticed that a smell of mustard seed incense, for which she was at a loss to account for, was pervading her clothes and hair. She took a hot bath and put on other clothes, but still the same odor of incense pursued her. It was bad enough, even in private, to have this sensation of being, as it were, estranged from oneself. But now her body was playing tricks upon her, which her attendants must have noticed, and were no doubt discussing behind her back. Yet there was not one person among those about her with whom she could bring herself to discuss such things. And all this pent-up misery seemed only to increase the strange process of dissolution which had begun to attack her mind. Now that Genji was somewhat less anxious about Aoi's condition, the recollection of his extraordinary conversation with her at the crisis of her attack kept on recurring in his mind. and it made so painful an impression upon him that though it was now a long time since he had communicated with Rokujo, he knew that she must be deeply offended. He felt that no kind of intimacy with her would ever again be possible. Yet, in the end, pity prevailed, and he sent her a letter. It seemed indeed that it would at present be heartless to absent himself at all from one who had just passed through days of such terrible suffering, and from her friends who were still in a state of the gravest anxiety. And all his secret excursions were abandoned. I would not have expected Genji, of all people, to play the dutiful husband after his wife had a child, and to stay in and, take it upon himself to stop all of his affairs while she's recovering. It's a very small, positive step, and don't think for a minute that it makes up for everything before. Aoi still remained in a condition so serious that he was not allowed to see her. The child was as handsome an infant as you could wish to see. The great interest which Genji took in it, and the zest with which he entered into all the arrangements which were for its welfare, delighted Aoi's father, inasmuch as they seemed signs of a better understanding between his daughter and Genji. And though her slow recovery caused him great anxiety, he realized that an illness such as that through which she had just passed must inevitably leave considerable traces behind it, and he persuaded himself that her condition was less dangerous than one might have supposed. The child remained Genji of the heir apparent, and made him long to see Fujitsubo's little son again. Reminded Genji of the heir apparent. Sorry. So, yeah, to see Fujitsubo's little son, sure. Yeah. Her son. Not to be confused with his own son. The desire took such strong hold upon him that at last he sent Aoi a message in which he said, "It is a very long time since I have been to the palace, or indeed have paid any visits at all. I am beginning to feel the need of a little distraction. So, today, I am going out for a short while, and should like to see you before I go. I do not want to feel that we are completely cut off from one another." So he pleaded, and he was supported by her ladies, who told her that Prince Genji was her own dear lord, and that she ought not to be so proud and stiff with him. She feared that her illness had told upon her looks, and she was for speaking to him with a curtain between. But this, too, her gentlewoman would not allow. He brought a stool close to where she was laying, and began speaking to her, of one thing or another. Occasionally, she put in a word or two, but it was evident that she was still very weak. Nevertheless, it was difficult to believe that she had so recently seemed almost at the point of death. They were talking quietly together about those worst days of her illness, and how they now seemed like an evil dream, when suddenly he recollected the extraordinary conversation he had had with her when she was lying apparently at her last gasp, and filled with a sudden bitterness, he said to her, "There are many other things that I must one day talk to you about, but you seem very tired, and perhaps I had better leave you." So saying, he arranged her pillows, brought her warm water to wash in, and in fact played the sick nurse so well that those about her wondered where he had acquired the art. Yeah, he acquired the art because everyone he comes near to dies. You kind of learn some skills when that's your day in, day out. Still perilously beautiful but weak and listless, she seemed, as she lay motionless on the bed, at times almost to fade out of existence. He gazed at her with fond concern. Her hair, every ringlet still in its right place, was spread out over the pillow. Never before had her marvelous beauty so strangely impressed him. Was it conceivable that year after year he should have allowed such a woman to continue in estrangement from him? Still, he stood gazing at her. "I must start for the palace," he said at last, "but I shall not be away long. Now that you are better, you must try to make your mother feel less anxious about you when she comes presently. For though she tries hard not to show it, she is still terribly distressed about you. You must begin now to make an effort to sit up for a little while each day. I think it is partly because she spoils you so much that you are taking so long to get well." As he left the room, robed in all the magnificence of his court attire, she followed him with her eyes more fixedly than ever in her life before. The attendance of the officers who took part in the autumn session was required, and Aoi's father accompanied Genji to the palace, as did also her brother, who needed the minister's assistance in making their arrangements for the coming political year. Many of their servants went too, and the great hall wore a deserted and melancholy aspect. Suddenly, Aoi was seized with the same choking fit as before, and was soon in a desperate condition. This news was brought to Genji in the palace, and, breaking off his audience, he at once made for home. The rest followed in hot haste, and though it was appointment evening, they gave up all thought of attending the proceedings, knowing that the tragic turn of affairs at the Great Hall would be considered a sufficient excuse. It was too late to get hold of the abbot from Mount Tendai, or any of the dignitaries who had given their assistance before. It was appalling that just when she seemed to have taken a turn for the better, she should so suddenly again be at the point of death. And the people at the Great Hall felt helpless and bewildered. Soon, the house was full of lackeys who were arriving from every side with messages of sympathy and inquiry. But from the inhabitants of that stricken house, they could obtain no information, for they seemed to do nothing but rush about from one room to another in a state of frenzy, which it was terrifying to behold. Remembering that several times already her possession had reduced her to a trance-like state, they did not for some time attempt to lay out the body, or even touch the pillows, but left her lying just as she was. After 2 or 3 days, however, it became clear that life was extinct. That's a rather abrupt way for things to go to reach an end for Aoi, and we are only still halfway through the chapter, which bears her name. Huh. Alright, so, let's actually, it is a little bit early, but let's go ahead and call it here, because this is a decent break-off point. Aoi just died, leaving Genji a widow, or a widower, I should say, and conveniently, he's got someone lined up. Anyway, so, this will mean we'll have a relatively short reading tomorrow to finish this up, but that'll give us plenty of time to yap and decompress, because I'm sure there will be thoughts, there will be ideas, there will be... I'm sure there will be time for revulsion. Although, this is the end of Volume 1 that's coming up. There are, I think, 3 other volumes in this. Really, Genji is more of a series of novels more than anything else. But yes, I'm sure we will have much to say. And given the length that's left, it's about 10 pages or so. We'll probably be wrapping up toward our normal halfway point. And that'll give us time to break for drinks and come back properly lubricated to have a relentless roasting of Genji. And I'm here for it. I'm so here for it. I'm starting to have my idea that just H-named characters are guaranteed to be horrible is generally gaining ground. We've got Heathcliff, Henry, the other Henry. Like, it's really just, if you have children of your own, don't use an H. Exactly. H is for horrible. Now I want to listen to Dr. Horrible again. Damn it! Okay, well, I guess I know what I'm doing tonight. Alright. So, let's go ahead and wrap up a little early tonight. We'll let things bounce around a little bit in our minds, and we will remember tonight. And remember the last few days, as we go into tomorrow. We will return to get the last half of a chapter of Genji tomorrow at 8 o'clock. And then we'll have plenty to talk about, I am certain. Until then, let's go ahead and break here. So, as always, thank you very much for joining us. If you haven't yet, I do suggest, implore, beg even, you're bringing me to beg, drop a like on the stream, maybe a subscription to the channel. Let everyone know that we're having some fun around here, despite the suspect choices of literature. You know what? That is entirely valid. If it gives you a chance to get a regular dose of Nathan Fillion, it doesn't matter what sort of media you consume. I'm here for it. All right, so there are so many that I will continually go back to the well for. All right, guys, let's go ahead and break here. We now all have some homework. Sorry. All right, until next time, have a wonderful night, and thank you very much for joining us. Until next time, bye now.